What you know matters, but who you know matters more. It might not be the original saying, but perhaps it's time for an update. A strong network doesn't or shouldn't act as a substitute for our skills, but it can provide us more opportunities to demonstrate them. Today, we answer the big question, what's the best way to build a network?
You just want me to go and just stand in a room with people I don't know and talk about something.
Stop trying to think about it as transactional. Just go into it with a complete blank slate. Just go into it as a human being.
As a business that wants to make a broader impact, if you stay in your lane, you're not going to be able to make all of the impact you can.
Learn how to exit a conversation gracefully. It's taken me far too long to learn this.
Hello and welcome to the Green Room by Deloitte. I'm Ollie Carpenter and today I'm joined by my co-host Lizzie. How are you doing, Lizzie?
Hi Ollie, I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good, thank you. As you can see, we're out of our studio today, and don't let anyone tell you showbiz isn't full of glitz and glamour. Our normal studio is getting some new air conditioning. So just like the challenges and road bumps that we talk about businesses facing on this pod, we've had to navigate a new path and find ourselves in this makeshift studio for the day. But it doesn't change anything other than a slightly pinker look. We still have to have a big topic to tackle today. We're taking a closer look at a part of work and our careers that many of us find challenging, networking. It's an idea that can fill many of us with dread, but networking is important. It can open up opportunities and excel our careers and our businesses. But it can also feel awkward and uncomfortable. So much so that 1 in 4 of us don't network at all. So how do we overcome this discomfort and find a way to make networking work for us and build mutually beneficial networks that will help us get where we want to be? We're going to explore it all as we answer the big question, what's the best way to build our network? Lizzie, who are we joined by today?
So I'm delighted to say today we are joined by Isabel Berwick, who leads the Working It brand at the Financial Times and is author of The Future-Proof Career. Welcome, Isabel.
Thanks for having me.
And also Kirsty Newman, who is Market Chair at Deloitte UK. Hi, Kirsty.
Hi.
So let's get started on the topic of networking and kick things off by considering what we actually mean by networking and what it looks like. So I think we might all imagine handing out business cards, but is that the reality of what networking is today? And what does networking mean to you in your roles? Isabel, shall I start with you?
Sure. My idea of networking has changed a lot in the last few years since I've had a much more outward-facing role, which is, probably a lot of the viewers and listeners to this podcast are thinking about. I think about it as a way of meeting, either virtually or in real life, interesting people who may be useful for things or they may not. I may just be interested in having a connection and an interesting conversation with them.
So less of the formal kind of introduction via a business card and more just the opportunity to connect.
Exactly.
Regardless of where it might lead to.
I try to keep it on quite a human level and think about it in terms of human connection. Yes. And I've made friends with some people I've met networking. So you know what, don't rule it out.
No, indeed. What about you, Kirsty?
Yeah, the word that sprung to mind was informal. So it's informal. It might be the start of a relationship, but it may just stay at that sort of informal connection point. But largely it's about connecting with people you otherwise wouldn't come across and you share some thoughts and ideas.
And for many of us, we will have been told, it's part of the job to network, put ourselves out there. I know I've had to do that and grow that network in a natural way. It's something we know we should do, but why is it so important? What are the benefits that successful networking can bring to our career? Kirsty?
I think it gives you the opportunity to reach people you wouldn't otherwise. So you're hearing a diversity of thought and interest areas from diverse organisations. It can allow you perhaps to find out about something you didn't know but is of interest to you. You can demonstrate engagement and support for things that you otherwise might not do. So allyship and things like that, just showing up at things. So certainly from that perspective. For Deloitte though, we're a business sort of steeped in relationships. So networking can, as I say, lead to relationships. So the broader your network, the more likely you are to build relationships. I think the other thing is we notice sort of increasingly for businesses, it's far less linear than it used to be. So we all had, a desire to sell or expand or whatever it was. Now businesses are collaborating. There's this often used phrase about ecosystems. So you just don't know who it might be beneficial or interesting to know. And I think we're all richer for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a secondary thing, but actually quite important. You're much more likely to get your next job from what we might call a loose tie. So somebody who's not a close colleague or friend and somebody you've met who's in your wider network is actually perhaps the person who might be the key to unlocking the next stage of your career, either internally or externally.
And Kirsty, we're talking about networking as individuals here, but networking is important to businesses as well, of course. And what business benefits can be seen from networking or encouraging their people to network?
Yeah, probably very similar again, though. You don't know, there's the expression create your own luck, isn't there? So just being better networked can lead to interesting opportunities for businesses. Many, many businesses now are deliberately having a greater impact on all of their stakeholders. And again, the opportunities to make that impact you can't always find them, you don't always know where you can make the best inroads. So, having that opportunity brought to you just through your network, interesting conversation, might Deloitte be interested? You've just turned up at this, which is on this topic, might we continue the discussion? So I think the more you're out representing your brands, whatever those might be, and connecting with people, not necessarily right in your space, although connecting with competitors can be very valuable as well. But just, adjacent businesses, adjacent sectors, the value of those broader thoughts, diversity of network benefits us all.
Well, it's an interesting point you make, Kirsty, because I wanted to sort of touch on how networking has changed in the last decade. On one hand, we've seen that opportunities to network face-to-face in particular have gone down quite significantly, with COVID and moving things into sort of a more hybrid environment. But on the other hand, we use platforms like LinkedIn to grow our professional network. So do we feel technology is helping us to network, or do those face-to-face meetings matter more now?
For me personally, I think LinkedIn is an enabler. I think it does allow some people to originate relationships, as you say, particularly in the recruitment space. Personally, I find it more of an enabler. So it's a great way to maintain a relationship. I see far less business cards being handed out now. People will often just say, I'll find you on LinkedIn. So it's a great way to connect, to stay in touch, and to put your message out there, which then allows people to come to you. So I think it has its place. Personally, I'm from a generation where I don't think you can beat face-to-face. If you're genuinely looking for an authentic relationship to develop, then I think face-to-face certainly, for me, has its place. But certainly, to your point about face-to-face, during COVID, we just couldn't do that. I think it's definitely back. I think there are probably as many events now as there ever were. But one of the things that I think is fantastic, I can think probably longer ago than a decade, if I'm honest, it's showing my age, but certainly we used to just have networking events. As a young professional, I could think of nothing worse. What, you just want me to go and just stand in a room with people I don't know and talk about something. Those were just awful. Now, most networking events are built around a topic. You might hear somebody speak on something. You might have a topic across a lunch. And that's just much more authentic for everybody. There's something to coalesce around and a reason to be there. One of the things we do is we run the Deloitte Chairs programme. And that's been fantastic for bringing together a community of peers around a topic of interest. So personally, I've met amazing people through that. I've heard all about their experiences. I've got a great network. It enables me then to keep abreast of what's going on and what's on their minds as business leaders. And I've also then connected into their organisation, but in a really authentic, rich way. So that would be an example of how that's an evolution from the, in my opinion, awful networking events of the past.
Where you just told, go and talk to people.
Yes, go do it.
Go do it, yeah. Do you think that there is a period in our life where, or in our career, where networking is more important than other times in our careers? What do you think, Isabel?
Possibly. I think it's a life skill, actually. I think for Gen Z and in due course Gen Alpha who are coming into the workforce, it's probably not something that's going to come naturally to them, so we may have to rethink. So because so much of life is online now, there's a real move to kind of, as Kirsty was pointing out, kind of the curated event. You probably wouldn't call it networking. It would be something that was a draw to come to and meet in real life. So I think the value of real life has become magnified for younger people in a way that perhaps we were less conscious of in earlier cohorts. Later in your career, I think particularly when if you're thinking of transitioning to the next stage of your career, it becomes important again. You have to start your pre-thinking, as you might say, probably years before you leave your current role or career, because you need to be going to networking events or events in the space that you're thinking of entering. And that's a whole different thing. But I think also very interesting for older people to think about. You could just try out different sectors, events, livery companies in the City of London, all those kinds of things are such rich sources of meeting new people or just hearing from people.
And it's interesting because I think one thing I observe is early in your career, you don't always get that support. And I'm talking from experience here as well. And you work your way up, and of course, then you're expected to work with clients and generate opportunities, whereas you haven't necessarily had that experience. So I guess the more we can be doing to help our more junior members of staff to have client connections, perhaps with peers at a commensurate level, the more that will then continue to build up through their careers. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah, definitely. It is a life skill.
Yeah.
So peer-to-peer, I think, is the safe space to try it. I think, employers should be encouraging all of their employees to build those peer-to-peer networks, going along to things that interest you. At least then it feels most comfortable and authentic to you. And I think that if you're a large organisation, the more you can do to enable people to network internally, again, just to practice the skills, and then have your senior colleagues perhaps acting more as role models and sharing their stories and what's worked for them.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it sounds like there's a plethora of opportunities out there for us to networking events specifically, events we go to more generally where you've got the opportunity there. But actually, it still seems that a lot of us aren't doing it. We mentioned at the start, 1 in 4 of us don't even network. What do we think some of those challenges are? Why is it that people still aren't taking that next step? Isabel, maybe I could turn to you first.
I mean, part of it is temperament, and some people absolutely hate going in. It's a natural human instinct not to want to talk to people you don't know. But I mean, for some people, it's genuinely painful. If you're a natural introvert, which I'm not, I think we have to understand that different people need different ways into conversations. Yeah. So if you can go with a colleague or a friend, if you can limit the amount of time you're spending, and in fact, I do this. Yeah, I've spent plenty of time idly looking at my phone outside events so that I don't have to mingle for the entire, sometimes 2 hours. I mean, my goodness. Yep. And your phone is your friend in this instance. If you find yourself alone, you can look at your phone for a few minutes, scan the room, find someone friendly looking and go up to them. I went to a drinks event. There was my old college, actually, for alumni of my old college. I did not know a single person in the room. No one that I knew from my cohort turned up. And a very kind woman took pity on me and started talking to me, and we have since become firm friends. So sometimes it can work out really well.
Yeah. And I guess the chances are if you're feeling that way, everyone else will be feeling that way too. So
equally, if you're in a 2 and a third person wants to come up, don't turn your back to them. No. I've seen that happen time and time again. I think, not to generalise, women tend to be quite good at opening up, but I've had men turn their back to me because they just want to talk to the person they're talking to. And I mean, that sends a very clear message, but you have to be very careful if you're a senior person and there are younger peers in the room. What message is that sending?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a lesson for all of us perhaps is to just be a little bit more understanding and accommodating when we're at these events, and if we spot someone in the room, maybe have a conversation with them.
Absolutely, go and say hi. So on the flip side, there are some who find it easy, is where you alluded to the fact that you're an extrovert, I think, or at least not so much an introvert.
Bit of an ambivert.
An ambivert. What does that mean?
So if you're an extrovert, you go to the conference, you go to all the things, and then you go to the bar after. Yeah. If you're an ambivert, you go to the conference, you enjoy it, you meet people during the day, and then you probably go to your room.
Got it.
You just draw a line.
Yes. So it's not the karaoke until 2 o'clock.
Probably not for me.
That's I think where I
get on well. I didn't know there was a term for it.
You see, I get fear of missing out if I'm not there till the bitter end.
I do think there is just that personal, it's not for me, and an assumption about all of that. I also, though, think for some people it's that there isn't going to be an immediate benefit to it. Yes. And they've got, a busy day job, an inbox which is bursting at the seams, a to-do list that runs on forever. And it's quite easy to think, well, if I just don't go to that, there won't be any immediate consequence to it, because often the benefit of networking is intangible and you don't know until you go. So I do think there's definitely that. And then I do also know, because I've fallen into this trap a couple of times in years gone by, where I've thought, well, I haven't really got time to do anything with anything that might manifest in the evening or the day or whatever. I haven't got time to follow up with anybody. But again, and back to perhaps LinkedIn, you know, it makes it so easy, because sometimes you can just connect with somebody afterwards to show the intent. And you don't have to have the immediate cup of coffee or whatever it is. You can just say, wouldn't it be great to catch up over the summer or something? Not so good if it's January, but you know, you can buy some time rather than think everything has to be immediate and my payback's going to be immediate. You just have to accept it for what it is.
Yes, that's really helpful advice. And then back to, you know, some people finding it challenging and then others finding it easy. Why do you think that is? What is it that means that some people find networking easy? Do you think there are particular roles or professions that really lend themselves to networking, and what can we borrow from them?
I'm not sure anyone finds it easy, because it is, as a human being, we don't like to walk into rooms where we don't know anyone. It makes us feel scared on a very primal level. So I think it's probably wrong to say that anyone enjoys that, but I think there are tricks and tips you can learn to be better at it. And being older is one of them, I think. There is a way in which, for example, in my career, because I have a very big LinkedIn network, I do a lot of events, people will now come up and speak to me. And that flips it so that you don't actually have to make very much effort. I have to think back to how it was when I went into a room and no one spoke to me and I had to present myself to them. So I think if you're a senior person, just try and remember what it was like. And to Kirsty's point, stop trying to think about it as transactional. Just go into it with a complete blank slate. Just go into it as a human being. And I think then that allows a connection that is slightly different, because likely you're not going to get something out of it immediately. It might be 2 years down the line or 5. I mean, honestly, it's delayed gratification of the highest order.
And to your point about finding a friend, it may not be about a business transaction that immediately materialises, but you might find out that the person you're talking to is planning to go to Japan, and you've just been to Japan, and you end up sharing some things and saying, I'll contact you with my itinerary. I don't know, but it's about connection, as you said.
And actually, if you have a couple of questions, particularly if you're a nervous kind of person, if you have a couple of questions, so sometimes I'll go to events and people will say to me, what have you been reading recently that you've really enjoyed? And I know that that's a kind of pro-tip question, but actually, it's a really great conversation opener.
That's great advice. You don't always have to be thinking business. It can just be a little personal touch then, can't it?
What are you watching on Netflix? That's always
That's
everyone gets into the book sets, don't they, of what they watch. It's always a good conversation.
Well, that speaks quite well to the point around authenticity, doesn't it? And the idea of inauthenticity often crops up when we talk about networking, that we're putting on an act, or, you know, we've spoken about it being quite transactional. I suppose, you know, are there any other thoughts beyond those kind of more personal questions that you would use as a way to build a more authentic relationship, and how do you overcome that perception of inauthenticity?
So I'm largely representing the Deloitte brand when I'm in any situation, but I'm Kirsty. So I do believe that I live the values of our brand and I represent it, but I can only show up as Kirsty. But those two things are obviously deeply connected in their minds. But for me, it has to be comfortable, and I'm very clear that what you see is what you get. I quite like making other people feel very comfortable. So I will welcome people in to a conversation. I would deliberately expand a group out. I don't actually have any tried and tested questions. I suppose I might draw on the topic or what brought you here or whatever, just to enable, because the question of what am I reading, that sent panic into my head, because I'm thinking nothing I'd want to share, or, you know, my inbox usually, or whatever it is. It sounds rather dull. I think it's just what's authentic to you. So just, you know, inquiring about people. As you were just saying earlier, I actually find going to things quite therapeutic sometimes, because it's just a break from whatever was in your head. Someone puts something else in your head, and you'll often find, to your point, you know, there might have been somewhere interesting that you're thinking of going as a holiday, or they've got a family with the same situation as you. So I can often find therapy from it, just because it's part of the job.
Yeah.
It's actually great fun. I am not an extrovert at all. You have to find the right energy. You need to be in the right mood sometimes. But it generally is great fun. Because what's the worst that can happen? That's what I sort of told my younger self. You're going along and you're going to talk to people. What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
Nobody speaks to you, and you do use your phone, go to the bathroom, or if it's horrendous, just leave.
You made a point there, Kirsty, which was really interesting about, you might find that someone's got a similar family situation. One of the things that I've found through networking, and obviously it has to sort of feel okay in the situation, but if you were to share something, it's quite often the fact that people will share back and you create a deeper connection.
Yes.
That I'm not saying you go in and sort of talk about your innermost secrets to the first person you meet, but it's interesting how you can get onto a topic which may be a little bit more personal, and then you get it back in droves, don't you? Which connects to, creates the connection and trust.
I was connected by a colleague the other day to someone who they said, just connecting you might find it interesting. And in the sign-off to make the connection, they said, good luck with the A-levels. Now, it's clear the person I was being connected with is not doing their A-levels. I was pretty certain of that. And so when I then responded, said, yes, let's meet up. I think we have something in common. We must have children doing A-levels.
Yes.
They then responded in kind.
Yes.
And we're now connected, and we haven't even met. But there was just that shared horror, frankly.
Something to get through.
See you on the other side
Yes, yeah.
type mentality. But you've just, you've shared a little bit of something about yourself, which is not really that private, but you've allowed that connection before we've even met.
Looking for a way to make a difference while you shop? Well, with Scope, you can. Scope is one of the national charities Deloitte supports as part of our social impact programme, 5 Million Futures. Visiting any of Scope's retail stores or online shop helps to support their work to create an equal future for disabled people. Every pre-loved item purchased or donated funds Scope's vital services and helps keep millions of items out of landfills. It's good for people and it's good for the planet. Just visit scope.org.uk to find out more. We talked about trust just then, and which is an incredibly important part of business, as we know. Kirsty, I wondered perhaps, could you talk a bit about Deloitte's Executive Board programme, which enables that opportunity to network, more of a sort of a platform for our firm and the cohorts of industry peers that go through it. What have you learned about creating environments that facilitate authentic interactions and networking through that programme?
Yeah, so ideally you're bringing together people with a common interest or a common goal. So you might bring together chief financial officers, you might bring together CHROs, audit committee chairs. So there's already a commonality to what they would want to discuss or benefit from hearing. Also, though, we invest in people in changing their careers. So as they transition from the early stages of perhaps their C-suite career, and then, as is quite common now, they then move on to sometimes a board portfolio. And we have deliberate programmes that seek to help people make an informed decision about what's going to be right for them, build the network. We've got an event tonight in our academy which brings together search firms and people that want to be non-exec directors. So valuable to us from a network perspective, and hopefully builds us some brand loyalty. But really, as long as there's a shared goal or a shared experience at this stage, then it's usually widely appreciated by everybody and fun.
Part of the programme is the Next Generation Academies that we run, which you just touched on, and I've just come back from our Chief Legal Officer Next Gen Academy, and it's such a brilliant opportunity to bring people together who are maybe 3 to 5 years out from becoming a Chief Legal Officer themselves. You create the network. That's the most important thing, is you enable them to create networks with each other, but also to hear sort of hot topics and get some development along the way. And it's all quite good fun along the way as well.
Yeah, and it's informative to us to hear what's on their mind.
Absolutely.
The people that nominate them into the programme, what are they hoping for them? Yeah. So the reciprocity is huge.
We've touched on it sort of in terms of how we can include people and make sure that we're having those broader conversations. But if the benefits of networking are sort of so significant and everyone's feeling empowered to network, how do we ensure that it is inclusive? What does our role and our background and our identity play in how we feel about networking? Isabel, perhaps I can turn to you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've thought about this a lot because Our natural networks tend to be, we have what's called homophily. We tend to gravitate towards people who are like us or look like us or come from the same background as us. So if you're networking in a quite intentional way, you have to go beyond those networks. And in fact, this is a great way to make your workforce more diverse in the longer term by boosting your network, by getting into spaces that you perhaps wouldn't normally get into. So for example, earlier in my career when I was editing the FT's workplace and management coverage, I had a young black columnist who was an entrepreneur and a founder, and through her, she would write about the network she was in. I went to a few events. I thought that was so useful and interesting. For me, as the older person who'd commissioned the work, I brought her into other events, and I just thought that, writ large, that has a ripple effect. I mean, mentoring has a role here as well, which we haven't really discussed. It's perhaps not networking per se, but mentoring and actually reverse mentoring perhaps more impactfully, where you have a younger person, often from a sort of diverse or different background from the majority of people in the company, is the mentor to someone who's in an executive senior role. And I think that's a very powerful way of bringing both groups into each other's networks.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And actually, I'm mentoring someone at the moment, and they're looking to build their network. And one of the ways I mentioned was the access to some of our networks, whether they're religious or sports-related networks. We've got a plethora of them, but it's really opened up their opportunities. And they've recently joined a mental health network within the firm. Through that network, they've built a really strong group of now colleagues who they work with, and it's been really interesting to see them grow in that way, because it's something you wouldn't necessarily do day to day, but I think plays a strong part in their overall development. So
yeah, that's a really good point, because that's the kind of internal, everyone can do it, accessible way of meeting. Essentially what I would call horizontal networking, where you're meeting peers across different functions and departments.
Yeah.
Kirsty, what role do businesses have to play in helping us overcome some of the challenges that we discussed earlier, and whether that's encouraging their people to network on an individual level, encouraging internal networking within large organisations, or thinking more broadly about where networking fits into wider business strategies? I just wondered if you can share any examples of how businesses or leaders have facilitated successful networking.
So I think internally, if you're a senior leader, you should be role modelling it. You should be sharing your experience. I'm sure it's empowering for people to hear us say, we really don't love this stuff. We are not delighted to walk into a room full of strangers and have to get to talk to somebody. So I definitely think sharing your stories, whether that's mentoring or whether that's on a formal platform, I think is very valuable. Definitely empower people at every stage of their career to start to learn those skills. So create the opportunities for them and make them believe it's valuable for them, that you're encouraging it as an employer. For us, for us as a business, it's relatively easy for us to convene people and businesses from across the spectrum. We've got agency to do so, and we've got the connections to do so. And we are very deliberate about doing it because we think it's extremely beneficial. As I say, as a business that wants to make a broader impact, if you stay in your lane, you're not going to be able to make all of the impact you can. So I just think we should all be doing it. It needs to be authentic to the business, though.
Yes.
It would be rather odd for a business, who's a manufacturer of X, suddenly seeking to convene with a service business from Y. It needs to be authentic. There needs to be a strategic rationale to it, although there might not be an immediate consequence to it. It has to at least be on that critical path.
Yes, makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So moving on then, looking at sort of the actual steps we might take to build our network, where do we start? So do we rip the plaster off and just throw ourselves into it? Or, does that mean we're just rushing into things too much, or do we need to take a step back? I mean, are there any strategies we should develop for networking? And if so, what should we consider? Isabel?
So number one is make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date, looks good, has a photo of you, people can find you. I am staggered by the number of people who have really bad LinkedIn profiles. I think partly it's because they think it's cheesy in some way. I think it's not really, it is a recruitment tool still, but much more than that. It's a place where people exchange views. I have very good, authentic, interesting conversations on there. I have met interesting people there who have been useful in my work. Particularly if you're nervous about getting started, it's a very low impact, low risk way to start. Start to comment on some people's posts, start to engage a little bit on there so that you're not a kind of ghost.
Yes.
Okay, and so when you meet people in real life and they want to connect with you on LinkedIn, you're there. You have a presence. That would be my first tip. My second tip is when you go to a particular networking event, if you have someone in mind you want to talk to, or if you know who's running the event, do a little bit of chat GPT or Google if you're old school before. Find out a little bit about the key people so that if you can get 2 minutes with them, you've got a question that you can ask them. And that's not inauthentic, it's strategic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah, being prepared.
Being prepared.
Having something to start the conversation with, that's brilliant.
As well prepared as you are, if you don't get to see them, you don't get to speak to them, you can send them a LinkedIn message the next day saying, I was looking out for you and sadly didn't manage to connect with you. And you know,
how did you find the event?
Yes, absolutely. So
Great
you can use
speech.
that. Yes, absolutely.
It wasn't.
Well, yeah. But you can certainly use that.
Yeah.
We say to colleagues that one of the first things to do is just stay in touch with former colleagues. When somebody goes to join another organisation, keep in touch with them.
Yeah.
That's your beginnings of a network.
Yes.
We also keep in touch with clients as they move from organisation to organisation. Just be deliberate about that and seek to stay connected. But again, I think it's back to what are you trying to achieve? So be clear on your goals, be realistic about the fact it can take a very long time, as you say, and then experiment a bit. You know, not everyone wants to throw themselves into things. So perhaps stick with topics or environments that are more comfortable for you or more adjacent to where you are, and then sort of, learn from that. And then just try to reflect and review. You know, I've tried this for 3 months. What's been the outcome? Yeah. Maybe I need to do something different.
Yes.
You know, but I would just keep saying, try to find the enjoyment in it.
Yes.
A handy reminder to make sure that my LinkedIn profile's up to date as well.
I'll connect with you later.
I look forward to it.
Networking, of course, it's not just about us making connections. I think, you've both alluded to this as well. It's not just for our own benefit, it's also about connecting others and making introductions too, isn't it? So what can we do to make sure we're facilitating networking and connecting others? Isabel, do you have a view?
It's about taking someone with you if you can, if you've got a +1 to an event. And it doesn't actually have to be a networking event, it could be anything. You know, if you're a senior person in any sort of business, you get invited to loads of things and you can quite often ask for a +1. It's not cheeky. And then you can pay it forward, bring someone along with you, perhaps someone who's not naturally interested or not naturally inclined to that.
Yes.
They can not hide behind you, but you provide a kind of security for them.
Yes.
And the other way of paying it forward is literally paying it forward. If you're a business sponsoring places at conferences for young people, how can you get involved? And actually, how can you get involved with organisations that are building young people's networks and careers? There are lots of social mobility organisations, for example, that you can get involved with. So I think it's paying it forward on the internal micro level, like taking a colleague, and perhaps something much bigger around being much more inclusive and bringing many more people into the networking world.
Nice, yeah. Anything, Kirsty, you'd add on that?
Yeah, and be willing to open up your network to others. So, when I meet someone, it's usually obvious why we have bothered to connect. They may be looking for a role or, in a particular sector that's of interest to us or whatever. So I sort of tend to somehow manage to store that away. And then, 3 weeks later, you're talking to someone else and you think, oh, they might be interested. Now, I always make sure, though, before I ever make the connection that both parties are agreeable to being connected. So there's a little bit that has to go on behind the scenes. But the more, because people have done it for me. I meet someone and they say, would you not know X? Let me take you over and introduce you, or you really should be, and I'll do it by email afterwards. So just that willingness, because if we're all in it for right-minded purpose, then nobody really minds having their own network extended.
Yes. So finally, as we start to kind of wrap things up, let's look to the future. What does the future of networking hold? AI is changing almost every part of our work. Will networking change too? Does one of you have a view that you'd kick off with?
I feel it will change,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure I'm going to be embracing the change, if I'm honest. So I think I said I have a preference for face-to-face, but I'm sure the network can multiply and multiply and multiply if I were to get more comfortable with avatar Kirsty. But that's a stretch too far for me. So I think that's when I would look to, and it was interesting you said earlier about the future generations and how some of them are going to have to learn it because they've been brought up in a different environment. I think it's going to be hugely interesting to see how they build their networks. It will probably look nothing like my journey, and it's probably, I'm just of the right age for this to see me, my version to see me through, because I do think it's going to change, but I'm not sure I would be the best at signalling how it might.
So I think with many things, AI is, there's going to be a mass of stuff, so there'll be a lot of online networking for sure, beyond LinkedIn, whatever other things happen. But actually the value of human connection, I think, will become more precious, as it will in creativity and in many other, sectors that you've probably already talked about on this podcast. So essentially, it's the chauffeur-driven cab rather than the driverless taxi of networking. And so it might become a kind of luxe Rolls-Royce experience, but maybe not. I think people always want to meet other people.
It is really interesting you mentioned Avatar Kirsty, though, because the metaverse and, it is developing at incredible pace. And I do have this vision of people sitting at home with their 3D headset on in a room meeting people whilst not having to leave the confines of their house, and whilst, like you, doesn't exactly sit comfortably with me, it might be super beneficial to those who are unable, for whatever reason, to physically
From an inclusion
get out.
perspective,
From an inclusion
absolutely.
perspective,
It could be, we would make great advances. And for some people, that's how they network currently.
Yes.
The gaming world and all of that. So I can't authentically represent it. I've only won one of those things once, and I was a disaster. My avatar was banging into everybody in the metaverse and that sort of thing. I'm really not suited to it. But, it's already happening and it's working for people.
Yeah.
And I think it might just be that networks will operate in different ways, that you'll just have, a multiplicity of even further than we have now.
Could be that comfort blanket that some people might need. Just thinking about, all of the really useful tips that you've both given in terms of building networks. What's one thing that all of us could start doing tomorrow to develop our professional network? Isabel, I'll turn to you first.
Learn how to exit a conversation gracefully. It's taken me far too long to learn this. The trick is you need to get away from the people you're talking to. You've felt that it's enough time. You need to work the room a little bit more. You say, I'm just going to need to go and talk to X over there. But before I go, I just wanted to ask you X. And you just ask them one last question. It signals that you're going, but it doesn't leave you. You don't have to pretend you need the bathroom or another drink.
Yes.
It's a graceful exit. So learn a graceful exit is my tip.
That's a
Brilliant.
great one. I like that.
Well, I have just learned a great That's wonderful advice. I think I would just say, just go do it, experiment, find what works for you, and keep optimistic about it.
The final question, to bring it back to our big question for this podcast, which I'll ask both of you. What's the best way to build a network? Isabel?
Be open, listen carefully, and have a cracking LinkedIn profile.
Love it.
Fantastic. Kirsty?
Be authentic, experiment, and enjoy.
Fantastic.
Brilliant.
We always ask for nice, succinct answers, don't we, to the big
do.
question, and that could not have been more succinct.
That was spot on. Well,
Thank you.
both very much for joining us. Really, really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for having
Thanks
me.
so much. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We release a new episode every other Tuesday with another big question. So don't forget to hit follow or subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening or watching. That way you'll be alerted whenever a new episode drops. This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad, original music by Ali Barrett.